Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Hannah Bratterud.
And I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Chris Province. And today it's awesome. We are now rolling into 2022 and look forward to doing some guided reflection. I thought we'd take some time today and kind of model the way of how we execute our year-end inventories and maybe a little bit of how we approach and attack each year. So let me start with this. How has the process been for you guys as we've worked through the end of 21? As you think back about your reflection process, how's it gone?
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting as we were preparing for the episode, just talking through a lot of similarities that we've all kind of experienced individually and started comparing notes. And it was like, oh, wow, we've all kind of looked at reflecting on the last 2 years instead of just the last year. It's kind of all melded together into this pandemic experience. And for whatever reason, I mean, I'll stop speaking for you guys and just for myself, you know, I did year-end reflection last year, but it was really muddy. Mm-hmm. And looking back on it, it felt really muddy. There was a lot of unpredictability in the middle of a lot of learning and steep learning curve. And this year does feel a little bit more actionable, a little bit more clarity and less muddy on kind of what are my learnings and what do I want to be intentional about in this next year. I will say, you know, as I reflected on 2020, what I wanted to be able to action on in 2021 was like, just effectively navigate a very different world. And that's sort of intentional, but I had to acknowledge at that point, there's still just a lot of unknowns and a lot to learn. And while that's always true, I think being able to recenter after a couple years and say, okay, who is Luke Freeman in this new world and in this after this pandemic and the way our business has changed and the way our family dynamics have changed and, you know, all of these things, I think I can answer that a little bit better than I could last year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, what you say, Luke, rings true for me too. This has really been more of a 2-year reflection as I don't even remember very well the end of last year. You know, I remember some things about it, but it's that word muddy. It seems true. The whole year of 2020 was a little bit of a blur. And for me, what's so interesting as I reflect back, you know, I have a very, very strong sense of where I was at the end of the year in 2019. And that's the year-end reflection that really keeps coming to mind of, you know, I was in the middle of a personally difficult time and I was in Norway. And in fact, we started this podcast about 2 years ago at the end of 2019. And here we are today back recording on Zoom. In those early days, we were recording on Zoom for every episode. We've kind of graduated and moved to a studio. But here we are. And the great thing about it is, you know, 2 years into this pandemic, it caught up with me. And I am sitting here today diagnosed with COVID and, you know, I'm kind of over the worst of it, but I'm able to have this conversation with you guys via technology, even though I'm in quarantine. Right. So where I was at in 2019, I was looking forward to 2020. You know, it was a challenging time in my life, but there was so much hope and anticipation for this new decade. And I still remember so well what I was looking forward to. And I was thinking, long term. I was thinking in terms of a decade, not just what's going to happen this next year. And I'm glad I did, because whatever plans I may have made for 2020, we all know what happened. And everything looked different, right? So I'm just here to say today what a difference a year makes and what a difference 2 years make. We tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in a year, but underestimate what we can accomplish in a decade. And so if we take the long view, I think our perspective might be a little different as we reflect back on this decade a few years from now.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, I like that mindset of where we are versus where we were. And it does feel like we can see a little further, into the future up the mountain than where we were last year at this time. It's been definitely a year. It just feels to me like it was a year of transition. A lot of just getting some motors started again. Businesses have continued to operate, but they're not what they were, right? The team dynamics are different. You have work from home elements. You have people calling out, for whether it's their illness or the illness of a relative. Staffing has become more difficult, so the teams are never fully built. So there's all of this transition, learning how to exist in a new world. Luke, I really want to embrace. It's like who is Chris Province in this new world? But then I have to think, what is our team in this new world? What is our business in this new world? And I want your thoughts on this. Are we reestablishing identity, or are we confirming identity? Does it get back to belief and values and anchoring back to find our way? But let's start with that. What are we doing here? Are we reestablishing, or are we confirming?
Yeah, I think it's what version of ourselves does this world need? I mean, so if you think about a snowshoe hare, in the summer it's brown and in the winter it's white, and it switches back and forth, but it's always a snowshoe hare. And I think there's an element of that for each of us individually, and then for any collective, our business, other businesses. There's definitely a kernel of a truth of who we are, what our identity is, what our beliefs are. But we get to choose a little bit, how is that going to show up, and what need is there in the market that we need to respond to and meet. And I want to go back to this, all the change of the last 2 years. There's been a lot of discussion out there about how the pandemic didn't really change trajectory. It just sped things up. So sped up labor shortage. I mean, everyone's been predicting labor shortage is coming, right? If we decrease immigration to the US and less people have babies, there's going to be a labor shortage. Well, guess what that looks like? What we thought was going to take 15 years. Now we kind of get a hint of what it looks like after just a couple years of stress on the system, adoption of technology and dispersed work and all of those things, gig economy. None of that's new, but now we've fast forwarded a little bit, and we get to say, okay, what are the needs of this new world, and what maybe would we have evolved in over a decade that, we've all been evolving really fast for 2 years. So what is it that the new world needs, and how do we get to meet those needs? And I don't want to spoiler alert for kind of this end of year thing. I think we're probably going to move to gratitude, but I'm just my takeaway, I'm just incredibly grateful that we're all still in a position where we can choose what do people need and how do we help them. And it might look like doing a Zoom coaching call, whereas 2 years ago it was having coffee with someone, and that's okay. I'm just super grateful that we still we survived and can help people. Yeah. And lots of folks can't say that.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm left with too, right? It took an amazing amount of grit, and it took an amazing amount of grace to move through the last 2 years for all of us, for the whole world, and for this team, right? And so what I'm left with is an amazing amount of gratitude for all of that, for coming through, for what I've learned, for who I've become, and for who we have become as a team, right? And that's one of the things for me that's been the consistent for these 2 years is this team. What an anchor that has been for me, both on a personal level and a professional level, for development, for being able to just kind of stay the course through all the turmoil. And that's one of the things that I think rises to the surface for me, and how important leadership becomes in times of difficult times, right? Because as a leader, we can impact greatly the lives of the people that we're in community with, right? So whether it's a leader in a family, whether it's a leader of an organization, whether it's, regardless of the different contexts that we find ourselves in, right? We can create connection. And that's the reoccurring theme for me of what does the world need? What can I provide that the world really needs? And it's all about connection, right? Individual connection, connecting people with each other, facilitating more meaningful human connection. And you two and our entire extended purpose and performance group team have provided that connection in a really meaningful way for me, so that, I'm left with so much gratitude for these last 2 years.
Yeah, it has been, that part has been really remarkable. Like, we have our team intact. We've actually grown our team over the last couple of years in a time of constriction. And that's taken a lot of sacrifice from everyone involved on our side. But it has a lot of power to it as well. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm also grateful that this is episode 83 of Magic in the Room. And it's just been, we talk about underestimating what is possible over an extended period of time. And I think our journey here reflects that, from the seed of an idea to being fully operational. So that's a great kind of overarching snapshot about a little bit about our mindset, what's happening in the world. But now let's kind of talk through some discoveries and let's have a little bit of guided reflection. Again, I want to model the way for the folks that listen, and maybe they can ask themselves the same questions. But as it relates to personal growth, I'm interested, like, when you look back on the last year, what are some areas where you feel like you did really well? And what are some areas, like, as you move into 22, you're going to apply higher levels of intention to extract more value from those efforts?
Yeah, so I'll start with your first question. Looking back, what did I do well? And I'll add on there, I don't know if you said this, what could I have done differently or better this past year? And for what I did well, the thing that really stands out for me is it was probably, May of this last year, when I just got this sense that I didn't want to plateau. I felt like 2020 had called out a lot in me, had figured out a lot of things that needed to be different. And I didn't want that pace of personal growth, that pace of challenge to change just because what the environment was placing on me had changed. I didn't want to kind of be lulled to sleep by stability, by predictability, anything like that. And so I started with just like an internal journey of, what is it that I need to tackle to continue being mature? And I'll really, thanks to the two of you, I mean, if listeners don't know, I'm the baby on this team. So I'm the young one. I'm a little bit behind in years. And so I have awesome models who are, a couple steps ahead of me in some life experience. And not just you two, but, I think about Dr. Bob and other people that we get to work with. And it makes me hungry. I remember studying in grad school, Kohlberg, when they were looking at how people learn best, they found that the fastest that people grow, and they had a school in New York City that was an experimental school, and they had middle school, high school students in there. And so they had all these different setups for cohorts they put together, what curriculum people went through. They found out that the curriculum didn't really matter. The fastest they could ever get anyone to uptake information and become more mature is if they would take a group of people who are all at, let's say, a bunch of 10th graders, and they put an 8th or 9th grader in with the cohort of 10th graders. And that eighth or ninth grader would grow and learn faster than anyone else in any other scenario. And that's a little bit how I feel, I think, being on this team sometimes. So I just ask myself, like, what do I need to do internally to not plateau out as a father, as a partner, as a business partner and team member, as a coach to people? And I mean, that's been really a theme for me the last 8-9 months, just like digging in. Like, what is it? What are limiting beliefs that I have? And it's been incredibly rewarding, and, starting to see some fruit from just asking those questions and diving in. What could I have done better? I try to be gracious with myself, but
well, we can use soft language. I mean, we can soften it up and just be like, where are some opportunities to apply additional intention?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's a very nice way to say it. You'll be nicer than me.
Yeah.
No, I think defaulting to action when I know that there's something that needs to be done. And I'll just say that internally for our team too. Like, my natural conflict style, my natural team development style is like to collaborate. And I will just collaborate things to death and be like, well, what does Chris think about this? What does Hannah think about this? What does Ben think about this? I better go make sure that everyone talks everything out, when there are some things that I'm like 80-90% sure I know the answer. And I have oftentimes leaned on that strength of facilitating collaboration to my own detriment and to the detriment of teams and people that I'm around. I feel like with clients, I've overcome that hurdle to some degree, and I lean less on that strength of collaboration and have become more directive, and because I see it provides value for them. So I want to start doing that internally more with the people closer to me. So there's this idea of like, I'm at my best sometimes with the people furthest away, clients, stakeholders, whatever. And so I want to bring some of those practices a little closer into the inner circle and be a little bit more courageous, directive, defaulting to action there.
That's awesome. Hannah, what about you?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. Lots of changes, life changes for me. I think the biggest shift for me has been, being able to just kind of reconnect with the joy of life and energy. And, where I was in 2020 often felt like I was just barely hanging on by a thread. While at the same time, a lot of really important growth and, some meaningful change happened, but it felt just hard and muddy and dark a lot of the time, right? And so 2021 felt more like joyful and light and, starting to reconnect with who I really am and being able to fully express that again in a way that I can bring enthusiasm and energy to our clients and to our team in a way that feels right. And so I think for me, just being able to show up more consistently with more energy again, after having gone through kind of what felt like a valley, both personally and from a, just global perspective, and just reconnecting, right? Reconnecting with who I am, developing new relationships, and, being someone who feels just more connected in general. And that's been kind of the biggest positive. And I think for me, what's the big thing for me of where I want to be more intentional next year is to reestablish those keystone habits, if you will, of reflection, creating space for just reflecting and thinking and visioning, right? I've talked about the podcast before about some of the morning routine that's been really meaningful to me over the years. And through this past year of a lot of change, some of those, because my life has changed and lifestyle has changed in some ways, some of those have kind of fallen to the wayside just because there's been so many other things to focus on, right? So that's really where I want to get back to, is more intentionality in how I plan my days, how I plan my weeks, how I execute. And that all starts with creating that space, right? And maybe it's going to look a little different in the new year, right? I'm in a different stage of life than I was 3-4 years ago. And so just kind of reestablishing the things that make me tick, right? Everything got kind of uprooted over the last couple of years. And that doesn't mean, I think where we often get caught is, oh no, like I failed at this and I'm not doing good in these areas. Well, maybe to your point, Luke, it's okay to have some grace and recognize we've been through a lot of shifts. Things are different, and it's okay to reassess and look at, maybe things can look different in 2022 than what they did, and we can still be very effective, and maybe we can even get better. And that's always my goal, is to just be better tomorrow than I was yesterday, right? And I'm still not going to be as good as I am the following year and the following weeks.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Luke, to your point, like that whole idea of growth, like throwing myself around a bunch of people that I don't belong with is the best way that I can grow. And that's something that I was lucky enough to recognize, even like high school. Like I knew I wanted to be around the smartest kids in the school, because if I, like, some of that might rub off on me because I wasn't one of them, right? But I could learn to be that. And that idea, Hannah, you speak to, of if we're going to become the best version of ourselves, like setting aside the time to say, this is how I accomplish that. Both key takeaways, from a personal growth, as I take my inventory for 21, I think I did a really good job with technical skills, like learning things about how products are built and different, just different agency that goes into product and the different types, and strategy and understanding all the different components of strategy. But for us, those are technical skills. As it relates to, personal development, I think, I got the Becoming Your Best delivery. I did get that in the can, and really took 40 plus years of learning and rolled it into something that can be delivered in relatively short order. And that becomes now it really brings a lot of our training and development together, puts a package around that, gives me something to speak to at conferences and different events next year. So exceedingly happy with how all those things went. I also think there was a lot of personal giving, and Hannah, maybe it was my year to sometimes be hanging on by a string. I mean, I remember having a call with Luke, sometime like August or September, where I'm like, dude, I'm just failing at everything. Like, I don't know how else to explain it other than I'm really sucking right now, and I'm sorry. But it wasn't due to a lack of effort. That's the whole thing. It's like you're pouring it in, and like the results aren't there, or like there's the potency of the effort is getting extracted somewhere along the way by someone we're giving it to. It just, for whatever reason, things don't always align. Like, I think life is all peaks and valleys. So there was a little bit of expense to that, in that, I was focusing on things that I had learned and those lessons learned, and the Becoming Your Best model. I was doing a lot of technical training, but I didn't make space for new reading, new discoveries, new ideas. I had a couple people make some really good suggestions, and I got about 20% into them. As normally I would just jump right in, gobble them up, internalize that and have it become part of my being. I just didn't get to clear those channels the way that I normally would. So as I go into next year, I want to talk about, yes, here are the things that we know technically, strategically, things about becoming, but I want to be exploring newer ideas and writing about newer ideas. So that's, I think, as I go into next year, I want to get more on that bleeding edge of just how we activate engagement and purpose and all the things that we talk about, just kind of recommitting to gathering, researching and understanding best practices around that.
I was just struck by this. I looked up Enneagrams at their best numbers.
Yeah.
And so Chris as an 8, I just heard you like saying a lot of this stuff. I just want to read it out loud. So at their best, they become self-restrained and magnanimous, merciful and forbearing, mastering the self through self-surrender to a higher authority, courageous, willing to put self in serious jeopardy to achieve their vision and have a lasting influence, may achieve true heroism and historical greatness. And I was like, as I was hearing you say like what you wanted and where you were at your best this year, I was like, it kind of fits.
Yeah, right.
It's
and then
pretty well. Yeah, the personality type.
And then Hannah, at your best, assimilate experiences in depth, making them deeply grateful and appreciative for what they have, which, I heard you just, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for this. I appreciate this. They become awed by the simple wonders of life, joyous and ecstatic, intimations of spiritual reality, of the boundless goodness of life. I think about your personal purpose of seeing the light in everyone. And this idea of being joyous and ecstatic. When you talked about where you were at the end of 2019 versus where you are this year and what you want to see coming next year, I heard a lot of those echoes. So very cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to hear that. I haven't read those in a while, but what you just read out loud, Luke, that is me at my best. And I felt that this past year I was getting back to my best self, right? And that means, and that's an ongoing process every day of becoming. And, but it's cool to get a little bit of confirmation that that's me at my best. So what I've been intuiting is right on par with me at my best.
And I think it shines a light on like the importance of reflection, right? Because when we reflect, we're going to get back to who we are. I'm going to show up as the 8, and I'm going to think about re-racking things in a way that allows me to be the 8. What are the things that are creating that dissonance? What are the things that are interrupting? What are the things that aren't producing results for me? How do I write a new story? Looking at the truth of the last year, does my life have the trajectory that I want it to have? If not, what interventions do I need to make? And that is really the key to year-end reflection. And so let's think about this in terms of roles. Probably a pretty hard question. You guys take it how you want. A lot of grace here. Obviously, we all carry a lot of roles, but when you think about all the roles that you fulfill during a particular year, all those relationships that you have, all those things that you're accountable to, like what role do you feel like you really excelled in last year? And, which of those roles do you want to focus on in 22? And maybe it's just because that's your desire. Maybe it's because there's a need. I don't know. But let's think about it. Think about your life in terms of roles and give me the same reflection.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to this theme of I have probably showed up at my best with the people furthest away from me. And I think that's not unusual. I think that's a lot of professionals' experience, right? Especially if you're successful at work and that's kind of your thing, you get really good at being successful at work and it kind of reinforces itself and it turns into this feedback loop. I'll say for me specifically, though, as an introvert whose primary jobs have been developing people and like people-centric things for a couple decades, I learned in college to like put the facilitator leader hat on or mask on, however you want to put it, costume on in some sense, and got pretty good at that. And that's not a bad thing. I really pride myself and I'm glad that I'm able to walk into a room, gauge the temperature, and then be what that room needs to invite them to something better, to whatever the next level is for that group, that team, that organization. But I don't know that I have been authentically let those parts of myself come out with the people closest to me as much. And so looking back, a couple of things are at play. I'll be pretty vulnerable. If anyone's listened to more of the podcast and listened through like 2020, one, we had all the external environmental things that were happening with 2020, but I also had a pretty serious kind of back injury thing going on where I ended up laid up in bed, ended up with a lot of pain that I had to manage for a lot of the year, tried a lot of different, chiropractor, this, that, or the other, before I eventually had back surgery. And then recovery from surgery took a long time. And I'm just now realizing a year later, like how I responded to that trauma was just to like be gritty, shut down my feelings and like move forward and perform for the people that I needed to perform for. Now, not that didn't serve the people closest to me, because like here we are now with a business, right, that's still working and survived 2020. So like, I'm not going to say that was even a bad strategy to just like be super gritty, have a ton of pain tolerance, push through whatever challenges 2020 threw at us. But I have had to relearn that like just pushing through and not feeling pain is not really how I want to live life. And it doesn't really make life fun or pleasant for the people closest to me if they're only with the gritty push through, no one's allowed to complain about anything guy. So, for me, that's what I really want moving forward, is to continue kind of peeling back some of those survival strategies and success strategies even that I've used for decades, and be able to say like, yes, those are tools that I should be able to put that costume on and help people. That's what I do, right? And I want to be able to get more comfortable with the person under that costume to be able to help people in a really authentic way, whether that's my partner, my sons, you guys. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a clear, where did I succeed? Where did I not? But in those roles, I think clients got served really well.
Yeah.
You guys probably a little less well. People who live in the same house as me, maybe even a little bit less well. And I would love to even that out. I think it just tells me like where I need to put my focus.
And I would mirror that. I think in, like our professional lives are roles of service. like we're only connecting with courageous people to advance their intention. And we like provide additional effort around doing that, how to get clarity around that, how to energize people to that vision. And like it takes quite a bit, and just monitoring that load, like where is my energy for doing that distributed? Because I need to be doing the same thing for my spouse, for my children, for our work team, and for our client partners. And I don't know how possible it is that gets like truly balanced. But I will say a couple of things that have helped. I was talking to someone that's been a provider to us and somebody that's been a client of ours. And, man, it's just such a good relationship. And she shared with me something that I started using with my partner, and I'm sharing here just for anybody that's listening. And the discussion was around how to have open dialogue and like connected conversation. And she said, what I really started doing is every day saying, like, I appreciate you, when speaking to her husband, like, I appreciate you. What are some things that are going really well? And what are some things we want to make happen? And like just those three simple questions. And like, hey, I see you. I appreciate you. I love you. What are some things that are really going well for us right now? And planting that gratitude as a partnership. And then saying, okay, let's bring other people into this fold and think about what do we want to make happen together? And those three questions like are a game changer. And I think have helped me go from that heavy external focus to having more meaningful conversations. And it's not like it's an additional lift. And that's the whole thing. I'm not sacrificing how I show up to client partners or our team because I'm having a different type of conversation here. So one, thank you, Laura, for that share. But it really is a game changer. And I think for me, Luke kind of twists that. So Hannah?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I've heard Laura share that as well. And it's really meaningful. And I think it's something that can apply not just in our personal, intimate relationships, but also with, client partners and with team members, right? Just having that kind of connected conversation on a regular basis. I was very inspired years ago by the book, Fierce Conversations, by Susan Scott, I believe is the author. I've talked about the book here before, but she says the conversation is the relationship. And that's a theme that keeps reoccurring. It's a reoccurring theme for me, right? So who am I having conversations with? Who deserve my best energy? Who deserve the most connected conversation? And how do I cultivate those types of conversations with the people that matter to me? And so if I were to reflect in terms of roles, this past year, I entered into a new personal relationship. And so that's felt really connected and meaningful and joyful. And, so I definitely, when things are new, it's probably easier to be all there and all in and show up as your best self, right? So yes, high marks on that one. But similarly, I do think because of me feeling more connected to me this year, right, I was able to create and maintain more meaningful connection with the people in my life. So I feel that with our work team, I was able to stay pretty consistently connected, not perfectly. And there's definitely more intentionality that I want to bring to our team next, as we move into this new year. Also with our client partners, right? So in any one-on-one relationships, whether they were with our client partners, with our team, and in my personal relationship, I feel like I did pretty well, right? Now, where I feel there's more room for improvement and intentionality is when it comes to the larger community. I felt a little bit disconnected from my local community. I also moved from, Bozeman to Big Sky, and kind of lost a little of that sense of local community because, and I already had felt like I lost that in 2020 because of the pandemic, right? And have been doing things to reconnect. And so just building community and being more present, and now recreating a new community, right? Because that's also something that serves our team and our business, right? The more present I am in my local business community and also in the larger business community, the more I can serve our team by creating more opportunity for business development. So that's another area that I really want to focus on, is the role I play in community and in general business development.
Yeah, awesome. So I can add, my answer, I feel like I performed pretty exceptionally in the community development role, taking on different board positions, volunteer experiences. You know what though, like that time has to come from somewhere. And that's the balance, right? Like if that extraction of time and effort takes time and effort away from something else. So, we finished Leadership Tulsa 360. I joined the Mortar program as a volunteer coach there, where we really serve like historically underrepresented entrepreneurs, and to develop their business plans, seek capital funding, things of that nature. So made a lot of really strong connections in our community where business is done. But then where did that effort come from? Well, that was a number of hours that comes out of our time together. I mean, that's where I clearly identified, what would I have been doing had I not been doing that? I would have been facilitating conversation amongst this team. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of start to see our team dynamic play out, right? And well, this is a year of community ties and community growth and external contribution or nonprofit contribution. Well, then the profit contribution reduces, right? And the team contribution erodes a bit. And so now we've got to lift that back up. And that's kind of, as I think about 22, where do I need to show up? It's kind of thinking, well, how do I take now what is an established community involvement and an established speaking involvement and an established client partner base, and now what is my formulated role in this team, right? And I think in that way, I think there is some reestablishing for myself and for that role, that it's not going to be confirmatory, because I'm looking, I'm looking, Luke, to your point, hey, I want to default to action 90% of the time. I know what needs to be done. And so I want to work with the Luke Freeman with the cape on that's, saving the days. And that allows me to fulfill a role differently. So monitoring that and having these kinds of discussions, I think is really powerful. And so that's, as I think about next year, it's really about what role do I want to establish in a sustainable way, exiting the last 2 years that may frame me up for the balance of the decade to be a strong contributor to this team.
Yeah, I love that, Chris. And what kind of came to mind for me as you were talking was this idea that when we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. And whether we're intentional about it or not, we end up saying no to something. Even if we didn't explicitly say no, it shows up somehow in that balls get dropped. And I speak from personal experience because I'm someone who likes to say yes. I'd much rather say yes and take on another assignment or another role or another this or another that. And what starts to happen is if I'm not intentional about what I say yes to, I'm also not intentional about what I say no to. So that's just a good reminder for me moving into this year as I do look to get more involved in various community development initiatives. As I say yes to these things, what are the things that I say no to? And I want to choose intentionally what to say no to, what to maybe stop doing as I start new things so that, I can show up with energy to the things that really matter. And that, reminds me too of our friend, Steve Laswell, who always has words of wisdom, right? But it's really about harmony. He talked about, because you mentioned balance earlier, Chris. I don't know that there's ever perfect balance. Balance has this notion that, yes, balance is dynamic, something that's constantly shifting, but we get this idea that everything always has to be perfectly balanced. I don't think it is, but I do think it's possible to find harmony between all the areas and all the roles that we have to play, right? So how can all those roles play in harmony with each other and not in dissonance?
There we go. Yeah, like avoiding like one role creating dissonance for another. That is really key. And I think as we mature, as we continue to grow our skills, we're better outfitted to do that. Like if we have this fixed approach, we're probably going to suffer more. And so I want to make a call out, and this is for maybe people like me. So if you're not like me, this probably doesn't apply to you. But what I would call out on this threat of saying yes to everything, there's this idea that we get our values from our mother and our value from our father, right? And and another place I'm coming from is like, I really believe people come by what they are very honestly, and maybe if you did not grow up feeling seen, right, or valued for just being you, we start to derive a larger sense of our value from what other people believe of us that don't live in the same household, right? So it's the things that I can do for people where I derive my value from. And therefore, I'm at a high risk of being overcommitted because of the story I want someone else to tell about me when I'm not there, right? So when you have that sort of, maybe you didn't feel seen growing up, maybe you come from a fatherless home, maybe like understand these are things that as a professional and as a leader, you might be subject to, but just getting comfortable with like, hey, this is who I am. This is probably why that happens. And so here's how I can get comfortable with saying no. Or, for me, the secret is narrowing my focus. Like if it has to do with underrepresentation or children, then yes. If it has to do with anything that's not that, it's probably no. So that's kind of how I choose to handle that. How do I get clear about the things I care about most and say yes to things in that narrower channel versus getting spread way far out. So anyway, what are you laughing at, Hannah? You're smiling.
I appreciate, the reflection and I can definitely, I thought that was just really meaningful what you shared too about the roles that we see modeled, right? And our role models and how they impact us. And my story is different from yours. And so my experience, therefore, is different from yours too, in terms of where I get my value and what's important to me in terms of what others believe or think, right? And we can have a whole nother episode on that, but there's just a lot of goodness there.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to, and as we get into themes for 22, we'll scratch at that some more. But so a couple of questions. I'm going to cut out a couple of the things that I had on my sheet here in the interest of time, because there's two that I want to really get to. And that is, has there been any change in your purpose, or maybe it's just a change of how you view your purpose in the last year? And are you ready to kind of restate that purpose or reconfirm that for 22?
Yeah. So if anyone listens back to, we each have an episode on our own personal purpose. And I think, whenever that was, almost 2 years ago, the words that I was using was adduce emergence, which adduce just means to invite out, and emergence is, just something emerging, whatever's next for them. So it was helpful for me to go through a chapter where those were the words that I used. But I think for me to be more helpful to other people, I've changed how I express that to, my purpose is I invite leaders and teams to what is next for them. And it really is the same spirit, which I think as we evolve our personal purposes, there's going to be a lot of the same spirit. Like we don't, we're like that Arctic hare, right? The meat and bones inside of us is not changing. Sometimes we change a little piece of it, right? And maybe the flavor, how it's communicated. And for me, I've really found the last 6 months that I've been playing around with kind of that new statement. I want it to be helpful. And if I'm going to more effectively invite people into whatever is next on their developmental journey, like I need to be able to share my own story and my own journey and my own purpose really effectively. And so I had to come up with, how do I take like nerdy, whatever words like adduce, how do I make it something that people can feel in their gut and say, man, I want something that clear. I want something that directs my activity and my action every day. So that's really what drove me to change some of how I communicate it.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah, my words haven't changed. I still look for the light in every person I meet. I try to. That's my intention, to look for the light and invite their greatness to shine. Those words still hold a lot of meaning for me in how I show up. And you alluded to it earlier, Luke, but looking for light is a theme in my life in general, both in my own life and in the lives of the people I connect with. And so that still rings true, and it still guides my actions and my decisions. And maybe the words will evolve and change. They have before. So, but for now, rolling into 2022, that's still the case.
Awesome. And my words really haven't changed. How I speak them to some people sometimes do. My purpose is to connect in meaningful ways with courageous leaders to advance their purpose, intention, and gratitude. And I capture that in explicit terms because purpose, intention, and gratitude, that's what makes life rich. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? As soon as you tell me what you believe, then there is a path where there's a lot of thriving and happiness and joy and belonging. And until we know what we believe, it's very difficult to get there. And, that's going to show up a little bit in my theme for 22. But I just like to say, I only get out of bed in the morning to achieve your vision of success. If I'm speaking to someone else, but I know that's what I live. And the commitments that hang with me most are use my curiosity to learn something new every day, do something remarkable for someone else today, make certain my wife and children know that they're loved. There's 4 or 5 commitments that really align in, connecting with my extended family and friends. That's a daily commitment. So, when I think about what Laura shared with me and those questions and how they allow us to connect differently, to me, if I can derive value from life through my connection with other people, then it doesn't have to do with the deeds, right? I don't have to action every ask. if there's meaningful connection and belonging between me and someone else. Like, we wouldn't be doing these things if we didn't believe similarly. And that's another thing about where I'm going with 22 is like, it's if we know what we believe, if we know our intention, then there is a path. Until we figure that out, life will remain very difficult. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
I want to share this because I think we have some overlap on our purposes. Obviously, we all care about others. We're all in it every day to serve the people that we're around, like in a really authentic way. I mean, that's one thing I love about this team. Everyone on our team, like, they wake up every day and they want to make the lives of the people around them better. But I'm kind of a visual guy, metaphor guy. And lately I've just had this image in my head of, if you go in the woods, oftentimes you'll find places where there's like very thick, a foot of just like wet, matted leaves. And I've just had this image over and over the last several months of like clearing away this pile of just matted, damp leaves until you can see the bare dirt of the forest floor underneath. And you guys, anyone who's kind of been outside, worked with plants, worked with landscaping, whatever, knows that if you do that anywhere in the US, maybe not in the desert, I don't know, but where I live in Oklahoma, if you do that, a bunch of stuff is going to start sprouting. There's all these seeds that are laying dormant in the ground, and all they need is some sunlight and a different oxygen content and whatever. And all of these processes are going to kick in and stuff is going to start shooting out. And so I've just been imagining this clearing away the matted leaves and this wildflower just like sprouting and blooming. And I feel like that's my purpose. I feel like my purpose right now is a picture and an image, even more than the words that I shared. And I hear that with you guys too. It's this idea of creating space for these seeds that lay dormant in everyone we cross paths with, and in organizations that we cross paths with, and in teams. There's these seeds, there's these beautiful things ready to sprout if only we will make the space for them. And I guess I wanted to share that just because any leader listening can do that. I think if you go into a day and say, how do I clear away some matted leaves and create space for my team, for this person that's struggling, for a spouse, whatever it is, how do they sprout and bloom just by me creating a space for them to do it? Asking a couple questions, right? Because the seeds are there. And I don't have to be responsible for making them sprout because they're there. They've been placed there. We just have to create a space.
That is such a beautiful metaphor, Luke. I really appreciate that. And when I say I invite greatness to shine, right? And that's what it is, because I believe there's greatness in every human being. And if anything has changed in how I articulate my purpose, it's really in how I articulate that belief. I used to say, I believe there's potential for greatness in everyone. Now I just say, I believe there's greatness in everyone, period. And those are those seeds, right? And that's our calling and our role as leaders, is to water those seeds and provide the light and the growing conditions for those seeds to sprout.
Yeah. And so that's kind of a walk away here. I want to challenge the leaders that are listening. Like, how do you create space? And this was one of our inventory questions that we're not going to get to answer today, but how do you create space for yourself and your team? Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your organization or the leadership in your organization. How do you create space for reflection? The process that we went through today. How do you create space for recognition? Like, what's going well and who's making those key contributions for the things that are going well? Like, how do you make that space and make that recognition happen? And how do you make space for rejuvenation? How do you re-energize the team, rejuvenate the team for another day? How do you rejuvenate yourself? How do you rejuvenate your organization? Thinking through all of these things: reflection, recognition, rejuvenation. How do you create space for these on an individual, team-based, and organizational level? So think about that as you kind of process these yearly inventories and strategies heading into 22. And then thinking about what are the things you have committed to learning and doing through this next year, and get those down, get them recorded, start tracking those. If you use OKRs, make it an objective or a key result of an objective. How does it fit into the larger picture? But write them down, make them explicit, and start measuring progress against them. So those are just a couple of other reflection type questions. You've heard kind of our process and our approach and where our collective minds are. But as we exit today, I want to think about, let's cast in the 22, let's theme the year. I know what the theme is for me after doing all of these reflections, but for each of you, what as we close out this episode today and your final thoughts, give us your theme for 2022.
Yeah, so I think I have a theme. I'm a little torn though, because I think it's resilience. What I most want for this year is to not run out of resilience. And where I'm hesitant is it sounds like being gritty. And that's what I've leaned on a lot the last couple of years. And I don't want to just keep using that same tool over and over again. What I want to do is find sustainable resilience, which comes from a place of creativity inside myself. So instead of against pain, against external challenge, I want my theme to be resilience, but from a place of inner creativity and love for the people around me. And to do that, yes, it requires some grit, but it also requires an authentic journey to continue to figure out what is going to spark that creativity, what is going to spark that energy generated inside me that can then spill out to others.
Yeah. And Luke, I know how creative a person you are, and something that I think when you theme it that way is what happens if we don't fight it? When we feel the energy taking us someplace we don't want to go, jump into that flow and use your creativity to redirect it with its own energy, with what's already built, versus trying to grit it out and push sand against the ocean and pull it the other way. What I would encourage you, just jump in, go with the line of energy that's already there, and use those creative strengths to redirect that situation. Because I know sometimes it just feels like, we're fighting it. We're trying to wrestle the dragon instead of entering the dragon, right? So let's just go with it and see if we can use our other capacities to take us to a different spot.
Yeah, that's hugely valuable. Thank you.
For me, the theme for this new year is expansion. I want to enter into this year and really, as I think about walking through this year, and it's expansiveness, both in who I am and how I show up, how I serve, who I serve, and ultimately expansiveness in what I accomplish, not just in terms of, measurable metrics, but the impact that I have on individuals and the larger community.
Awesome. And my theme is, primarily about belief. 2022 for me will be the year of belief. Past years we've had the year of breakthrough, the year of intention. This is the year of belief, and I think a lot has to do with that question of what version of me does the world need right now? It has to come from what I believe. And the middle part of the bell curve is a messy, messy place to be. And being everything that everyone else expects us to be puts us right in the middle of that bell curve. I mean, it takes incredible strength to say, here's what I believe, here's what makes me unique and different, And that's going to put me on an edge of that distribution curve. But what's beautiful about that edge, it allows me audience. Like the people out there on the edge, I can speak to a greater percentage of them. I can draw people to my vision of community-based work and thriving and what thriving looks like. And we can be the same person on Monday we are on Sunday. Like what we believe on Monday is no different than what we believe on Sunday. How can we show up differently? Like that sort of thing. I want to challenge myself to align all my actions to what I believe to be true and what I believe my value proposition is. And I want to challenge other courageous leaders to do the same. Like get out of the messy middle, have the clarity of thought and intention to let's all be market makers to a certain degree and draw people to our visions. But that's not done in the middle. If we are only the people everyone expects us to be, we make no progress. We have to be market makers. And that's why 22 for me, that's where it will focus. And that's where I want my intention to be. So thank you guys for sharing your vision of 22 and kind of going through this process of reflection. So any final thoughts or closing words before we get out of here today?
I'm just left with a lot of gratitude. And so thank you for just being in community with us and for continuing these conversations.
I knew Hannah was going to steal it. Yeah, gratitude. Just very grateful for the journey, for the community, excited about what comes next.
But and it's these conversations, creating this space for reflection that also fuels our resilience. So that's the modeling that we want to lead the way for whether it's folks that are listening, for the teams that we engage with. Also grateful, episode 83 in the books. Thank you. And until next time here on Magic in the Room, thank you, Luke and Hannah. Thanks to Ben West back in the studio, and talk to everybody soon.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.